Yeah, someday if you want to swoop me up, if I'm not working and I have some time, we can figure out a day, maybe on Sunday or a Sunday or something. We can go up to the electronics store where it's open, and we can custom build you the parts that you need
All right.
for a computer.
Well, the Almighty be praised. Hallelujah. Sorry. All right, we want to get ready to go ahead and begin our School of Messiah Bible Institute class session. Bless His great name. And thank you, dear brother. Appreciate that. We'll definitely get that computer made. Amen. I look forward to that. Hallelujah. Today we're going to be looking at the third part for the subject of the kingdom of Elohim. We covered the first part and the second part, which dealt with four major areas that we talked about. We talked about the terms associated with the kingdom. We talked about the prophecies related to the kingdom of Elohim on earth, because they're prophecies. And we also talked about the king of the kingdom, that's Yahshua. And we talked about the process of the kingdom's development. So, third part, we're going to begin talking about the coming of the kingdom. So before I get into that, let's just have a short word of prayer. Father, thank you right now for your great grace, your mercies. Thank you for this time of being able to share and provide biblical education in this particular subject. Give wisdom by your Spirit that I may be able to communicate with authority and power, and also Abiyah, that the Talmudim, the disciples, will have an open heart and spirit to receive, and may they be edified by this teaching, that they may teach others. In Yahshua's great name, amen. So we're going to begin talking about the coming of the kingdom. Okay. We talked about the kingdom and its development. We focused on the king of the kingdom and the process of the kingdom's development. That's what we dealt with in our last teaching. So this teaching, we want to do our best to finish this whole subject out. Hopefully we may be able to do that, depending on how much time I may belabor on each point. So we'll see if this does not end out today, then we'll have a last section, which will be part 4. Normally don't go 4 parts, but we'll see what happens. But anyway, the coming of the kingdom. When we understand the kingdom of Elohim and how it develops, its development began first spiritually. That's important for us to know, because when the Messiah came, he came preaching and saying the kingdom is at hand, or the kingdom is here. So when you're telling people that the kingdom is here, because John the Baptist, he said the same thing. The kingdom is here. It's translated, the kingdom is at hand, which is a way of saying the kingdom is here. The kingdom has come. So it came in what we would say the realm of the spirit. And what we mean by that is that it's here spiritually, because there is no physical, governmental operating of the kingdom, where the king is here on the earth physically, and we have a geographical location where we have a headquarters. Okay, I mean, yes, the way the kingdom of Elohim operates, it operates through his people that are scattered all over the world in different local congregations. In those local congregations, there is a government that works among the people of Elohim, but that government does not extend and exercise dominion over the lives of other nations. Okay? So hence, when we talk about the kingdom being here, the kingdom as it stands is a spiritual kingdom. It has not yet reached its fully developed, manifested state, if that makes sense. The full manifested development of the kingdom of Elohim is where all the people on the earth, right, will be under the dominion of the Messiah who will be king on the earth. That has not happened yet. Okay. But kingdom has come. Yeshua said it's at hand. And another scripture found in Matthew chapter 12, verses 25 through 28, he said that the kingdom of Elohim is come to you. He made that statement. But then in Luke chapter 17, and this is a passage that I like for us to look at. Those who are accustomed to the King James Version, in Luke 17, verse 20 through 21, it's not really translated accurately. It's the passage where it talks about the kingdom of Elohim is in you. That's the way it's translated, but that's not the accurate translation. So I want to bring some clarity to that. So I'm going to read it from the King James, and I'm going to read it from this translation, but I want to show how that when you look at the original words, at least that's translated in the Greek, there's a message that is conveyed that helps us to understand what the Messiah was actually saying. So, let's 15. Let me go to 17. 17 verse 20. Here it is. And when he was demanded of the Pharisees when the kingdom of Elohim should come, he answered them and said, the kingdom of Elohim cometh not with observation. I'm going to hold it right here just for a moment. So Messiah here, he's asked by those of the sect of the Pharisees about the kingdom, when it is to come, because they heard Yahshua talking about the kingdom is here, the kingdom is at hand, and so they asked him the question, when is it coming? And this is Messiah's response. He said, the kingdom of Elohim does not come with observation. So based upon this verse, this is where we get the concept that the kingdom of Elohim is in the spirit. It is spiritual. Okay? Because Yahshua said, it does not come with observation. You cannot see it. It's not like a kingdom like the Egyptians or the Roman Empire or the Babylonian kingdom. He said, right now, he said, it's not like that. He said, the kingdom of Elohim does not come with observation. You don't see it. This is what he was trying to say. He was conveying the message that right now, during the time when he was walking among them, it was present, but it was spiritual. In verse 21, it gives a little bit more clarity. Now, verse 21 in the King James Version, it doesn't translate it as accurately as it should, but I just want to read it, and then I'm going to apply the proper translation of the word. So it says, neither shall they say, lo here, or lo there. In other words, neither shall they say, hey, look over here, here's where it is, or look over there, there's where it is. In other words, look, you guys, it's not with observation. This is spiritual. He says, for behold, the kingdom of Elohim is within you. Now, the phrase within you, that's translated in the King James Version. If anybody who have a King James Version, it will say the kingdom is within you. That's how they translate it. But when you look at the original words in the language, the term within is not the proper word to use for within. It's not the proper term. Because the Greek word here that's used is a word called indidusko. Indidusko is a Greek word which means to envelop or to surround. That's what the word means. It means to put something in, all right? To surround or to envelop. So the proper way to translate that word, which in the interlinear translation, it gives a more accurate translation. Because I have like literal, the Greek with the literal interlinear translation. Then on the side, I have the English, 1611 King James Version translation. But the literal translation of that word, indidusko, is that the kingdom of Elohim is in the midst of you. In other words, it surrounds you. That's the idea. It's right here among you. So the idea is that it's not saying that the kingdom of Elohim is within a person, because remember who Messiah is responding to. He's responding to Pharisees who did not believe in him as being the Messiah. All right. So these Pharisees that didn't believe in the Messiah, they were unbelievers. They were not a part of the kingdom. Now, I don't know if they may have repented and received Yahshua as their Messiah or not downstream. At that particular time, they were not believers. All right? So, when we talk about the kingdom being in someone, because, when you read a translation and you see where it says the kingdom of Elohim is within you, based upon what you read, it's saying that the kingdom is inside of a person. Based upon the translation. That's not what the word means in the original Greek. All right? So, and I'm bringing this out because most believers are not familiar with the original Greek. They're not familiar with the literal translation. And, no properly, and they don't know that it's not translated as properly as it could have been, then they're just going to accept what they read. No fault of their own. You understand? So I find it necessary that in teaching the scriptures, I always have, this is why I use this, okay? I have the interlinear Greek, then the literal translation from the Greek, and the King James Version on the side. I always make this comparison because I want to show people that you always need to be careful about the translations you read. It's important that as students of the scriptures that you get accustomed to always doing a check. You get familiar with the original languages, the literal translation from the languages, so that you can make sure that you're getting the proper understanding of what the scriptures are saying. All right? There are many places in the Bible where you have things that are not translated as accurately as they should. But when you do translate it accurately, all right, it makes more sense. Because it doesn't make sense for the Messiah to tell Pharisees that don't believe in him, saying to them, the kingdom is within you. They're not believers. Okay, you got it?
Yeah.
Now we who are believers, okay, and we who have the Spirit in us, we know that the rule and dominion of Elohim, it doesn't just surround us, but it is in us. It has, he has dominion over us and it's in us. His rule operates inside of us as well. But that's not what the scriptures say. It doesn't say that the kingdom is inside of us, even though I believe the kingdom is in us. That's not what that says. You follow? So it's important that we understand what is being said. The idea that's being said about the kingdom is that the kingdom does not come with observation. The kingdom is spiritual, but it is yet among us. This is what is being said by Yahshua. Okay? And he wanted to make it very clear, since he was asked, when's the kingdom come? He said, it's here, dude. It's here. It's here. You can't see it. That's what he's saying. It does not come with observation. He says people can say, look over here, look over there. No, it is among you, but you can't see it. It's spiritual. Okay? So right now, the kingdom of Elohim is here in our realm. Okay? Let's not get that twisted. It's here in our realm, functioning, but it's spiritual, it's growing, it's developing. And as people come to faith in the Messiah, the kingdom of Elohim is continuing to expand. All right? And we talked about in our last teaching how there were some parables that described how the kingdom would develop. That it was like a mustard seed that was sown into the earth, all right? And it grows and it becomes this huge tree where the birds of the air can come and lodge. So it's describing the fact that the kingdom of Elohim will go through a process of development, okay? That's important to understand. So since the time the Messiah and John the Baptist came, the kingdom came into the realm of our world. Messiah took the authority of the kingdom from the religious leaders and gave it to the apostles. So anyway, I'm going to continue on. The kingdom of Elohim came to the world first in the realm of the spirit. Now I've already said something about it, but this is a part of our notes that we have in our sixth point of our topic. So we know presently the kingdom is invisible. Also, Yahshua declared that the kingdom is not of this world. All right? So we know that his kingdom is different from the kingdoms that are of this world. If you look over in John chapter 18, John chapter 18, verse 36. I want to go to that real quick. Right, John chapter 18, verse 36. It says, Yahshua answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Judeans. But now is my kingdom not from hence, or not from here. So, Messiah said his kingdom is not of this world. So, in one place he said, it's invisible, you can't see it, it's among you. Okay? And the reason why it is because there's a purpose. There's a present purpose that Elohim has to deliver all men from sin. That's his purpose. That's what the present purpose of the Almighty is that all of those of the lost sheep of the house of Israel might return to Elohim through the Messiah, and that all people of the nations would also be saved and become one with the house of Israel. That is the goal of Elohim during this time period right now. All right? That's the aim. So, at this point in time, there is no visible kingdom of Elohim on the earth. Because like he said, notice what he said. He said, if my kingdom were, if it was here, he said, then would my servants fight. All right? Now, Messiah made this statement when he was about to be arrested by the Judeans. This is when they came to arrest him. He said, look, actually, no, I'm sorry. Actually, he was already arrested at the time when that statement was made, because he was talking to Pilate. So at that time, you know, he said, my kingdom's not of this world. So it's important that we understand, during this era of time, the kingdom of Elohim is here, it's growing, it's developing. You know, you have more people that are coming and becoming a part of Messiah, making him their king, and they are in covenant with him. So his kingdom is developing, and when the time comes, the king is going to come, and when he comes to the earth, that's when him and his servants are going to fight. There will be a battle, but only when the king comes. So right now, we don't have no business with taking up arms and fighting nations. That's not what our king has called us to do. All right? Right now, during this era of time, until the king comes, our responsibility is to do one thing: make disciples and teach them to be obedient to all that he has commanded. That's our mandate. Okay? So that's important. So as it relates to the kingdom of Elohim, we know right now it's not visible. Okay? It is spiritual. It's not of this world. The parable that emphasizes this same concept is about the mustard seed. So I want to re-emphasize the mustard seed. So let's go to Matthew chapter 13. Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 through 21. Also in Mark chapter 4, verses 30 through 32. Okay. Both of those places talk about the mustard seed. Matthew chapter 13. Let's see. Matthew chapter 13. I wrote verse 31, verse 31 through 33, I believe it is. Yeah, that's what it is, not 21, I'm sorry. So, Matthew chapter 13, verse 31 through 33. And it says, and he put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. So yeah, we'll just leave it there. Mark chapter 4, verses 30 through 32, it gives the same information. It just uses the phrase kingdom of Elohim instead of kingdom of heaven. That's all. But what it does, it gives this picture, as I mentioned a little earlier, about the mustard seed being sown into the ground. Mustard seed, that's small, buried into the ground, hidden away from sight. Then it grows up and manifests, grows up, becomes a large shrub that is now useful for the lodging of birds and other animals. So the kingdom of Elohim starts off in the spirit, and then it will manifest and become visible before the time, or it'll become visible during the time when Messiah sets up his rule upon the earth. So now we want to look at power and the authority of the kingdom. So we need to know that the authority of the kingdom begins with Yahuwah. All right? In Psalm 22, verse 28, it gives us that indication that the authority of the kingdom originates with Yahuwah. So let's go to Psalm 22. Psalm 22 and the 28th verse. Listen to this. It says, "For the dominion belongs to Yahuwah, and he rules over the nations." In some translations, it will say, "For the kingdom belongs to Yahuwah, and he is the governor among the nations." So the power, the authority of the kingdom originates with Yahuwah. All right? And we need to be mindful that there is no governmental kingdom or system that is in operation today that can overthrow the kingdom of Elohim. All dominions and kingdoms and powers that exist presently in the earth derive their authority by the Almighty. Now, what other thing we know about the power and authority? That the Father, Abba, gave that authority to the Messiah, Yahshua. So, let's look at some scriptures that validate the fact that Yahshua is the one that has that power. Because the scriptures give us information about the fact that Yahshua was literally given the power of the kingdom by the Father. Check this out. Daniel chapter 7. Let's go to Daniel chapter 7. All right, Daniel chapter 7, let's look at verses 13 and 14. Daniel chapter 7. And in the 13th verse, it says, now listen to this. It says, "As I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being," or son of man is what it would literally translate to. It says, "I saw one like a son of man coming in the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient One," or the Ancient of Days, "and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed." Now, here you have, in this vision, Daniel sees what looks like to him as a human being. He calls the Son of Man, coming on the clouds to the Ancient of Days. This is how he describes it. And when he comes to the Ancient of Days, all right, the Ancient of Days gives him kingdom authority of a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. All right? Check this out. Now, let's go over to John chapter 17, verse 2. John chapter 17, verse 2. Let's listen to what this says. Now, in John chapter 17, verse 2, and this is Yahshua, he's speaking to the Father. He's praying to the Father. And in the second verse it says, "Since you have given him," well, let me read verse 1. I'll lead it in. It says, "After Yahshua had spoken these words, he looked up to heaven and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, so that the Son may glorify you. since you have given him authority over all people. You hear that? He says, since you have given him authority over all people, to give eternal life to whom you have given him. Another passage you want to look at is also in Matthew chapter 28. Matthew chapter 28, and I believe this would be in the 18th verse, I believe it is. And this is what it says. And Yeshua came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So, after the resurrection of the Messiah is when he makes this statement. So we see over in Daniel talks about the fact that there will be one looking like the Son of Man that will be given authority. All right? And a kingdom. And here Messiah is making these declarations that all power has been given to me. So, Messiah is the one that this kingdom authority has been given to. All right? Now, when we look at this authority, there is a stewardship authority that has been given. All right? It says, and we're going to catch this. Stewardship authority of the kingdom was committed to Israel. See, we talked about the fact that the kingdom of Elohim operates through the house of Israel. We talked about that when we talked about what Chronicles said. How that when Solomon was going to sit up on the throne, it says that he would sit up on the throne and rule as king over the kingdom of Elohim to Israel. You know, if you want to look that verse up, I'll just reiterate it. But that's found in 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 5. So it's important that we be mindful of that, all right, where it deals with the kingdom. That the kingdom of Elohim operates through the house of Israel. So there is what's called a stewardship authority. The kingdom operates through his people. Yeshua is the king of the kingdom. So let's go to Exodus chapter 19, verses 5 and 6. This is why people need to be careful when it comes to how you deal with those who are spiritual leaders in the body of Messiah. You know, you got to really be careful when you start talking about the kingdom of Elohim, because the kingdom of Elohim operates through his governmental spiritual leadership here on the earth. So when you got spiritual leaders who function in obedience to the Most High and that do exactly what the Almighty tells them to do, and then you have others who want to come in and would like to somehow discredit or somehow want to throw a wrench in what the Almighty is doing, you got to really be careful, because you can get yourself in serious trouble when you begin touching Yahuwah's anointed servants. You can get yourself in trouble that way. So anyway, let me go to Shemot, commonly called Exodus chapter 19, verses 5 and 6. Because the kingdom of Elohim operates and it flows through the house of Israel, his servants, those who serve Elohim. This is where it flows through. That's why you had a lot of Israelites that were losing their lives during the time of after they came out of Egyptian captivity. You know, they always wanted to say something against Moses. You know, they didn't trust Moses. They thought Moses was the one that brought them out there, that he was doing some magic or whatever, and he tried to get them to understand, you better trust in Elohim. And when they didn't listen to Moses, You know, the Most High had to do what he had to do. All right. Exodus 19, verses 5 and 6. It says, "Now therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine. But you shall be for me," listen to what it says, "but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom," or a kingdom of priests, "and a set-apart nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the Israelites." So the Most High says that the covenant house of Israel would be a kingdom of Kohanim in the earth. They'll be his servants that operate his kingdom in the earth. That's powerful. It's very, very powerful. So, we know that the kingdom of Elohim exists. We know that the kingdom of Elohim is here. But how does that kingdom of Elohim function and operate? It operates through his people. That's how it operates. And to be more specific, it operates governmentally through his stewards, those who are his servants, his ministers. Now, we want to show how the kingdom authority was taken from the unbelieving and corrupt religious leadership and how it was given to a new leadership. So let's go in your Bibles. You want to look at this. Matthew chapter 21. You want to look at this. You want to write this down too. This is very important stuff that we're dealing with right here. Because, you know, a lot of times when people talk about the whole concept of the kingdom, you know, they don't understand how the Almighty set this thing up. All right? But as we're learning, it's important that you understand that there was some transitions that took place. All right? There are people still to this day that think that there is some kind of authority that the rabbinic sect of Judaism still has as it relates to the kingdom of Elohim. You know, there's some messianic Jewish brothers that still have this idea that somehow there's an authority that the rabbinic Jews have in Elohim. But let's see what the Messiah says. See, I follow what the Messiah says, and what he says is what I believe and what I accept. So in Matthew chapter 21, and I'm going to read verses 42 and 43. Okay? Matthew chapter 21. And if I had more time, I would read the entire parable that begins from the 33rd verse. But I don't have time for that. But just so that you know, please, Talmudim students, please, when you get a chance, write this down. Matthew chapter 21, verse 33, all the way through verse 43. Read all that together, because it's a parable that Yahshua gives. I'm just showing where Yahshua takes the kingdom authority that the religious leaders were recognized as having. He removes it from them. He makes a declaration, and he says that he's given it to another. So in verse 42 of Matthew chapter 21, this is what it says. Yahshua said to them, "Have you never read in the scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? This was Yahuwah's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore, I tell you, the kingdom of Elohim will be taken away from you." I'm going to read it again. He's talking to the scribes and the Pharisees when he is making this statement. All right? It's important that we catch this. This is who he's talking to. And this is what he says. "Therefore I tell you, the kingdom of Elohim will be taken from you and given to a people that produces the fruits of the kingdom. So, those whom he was talking to, giving this parable to, and this parable was about a landowner that had a vineyard. He goes and leaves for a time, and he leaves his vineyard to the husbandmen who were the keepers of the vineyards, the caretakers of the vineyard. And he would send back servants to collect the produce in its season, you know. And every time the servants would come to collect the produce, the vineyard keepers would beat the servants and send them away. He sends his son to collect the produce, thinking that, hey, maybe they'll respect my son. And the keepers of the vineyard, they say, look, this is the heir, let's kill him, and we will take the vineyard for ourselves. All right? So Messiah here, he presents that parable to the religious leaders. And then he asked them a question. What do you think that the landowner should do? They said, well, he should miserably destroy those wretches and give the vineyard to other keepers. And then this is where Messiah makes the statement. He said, okay, he said, this are y'all own words. Y'all say that right? Okay, therefore, the kingdom is taken from you. It's going to be given to another that's going to bring forth its fruits. All right? So, when we talk about the kingdom of Elohim, we already talked about the fact that the kingdom of Elohim it functions within the house of Israel. And so it was still within the house of Israel. This is where it's important for us to understand, because you got some who want to teach this concept that Elohim stopped working with the house of Israel and is now working with the church, which is not Israel. Okay? And I always want to make it very clear that the kingdom operates through Israel and Israel only. And then everybody who is saved joins Israel. There is no separate, distinct church. There is no separate, distinct church that the Messiah came and started. What Messiah did, what he did was, as you find happening a lot of times, if you have a company, all right, and that company has to go through some transition because it was some corruption in the management, you know what I mean? All he did was come in, clean house, and change management. That's all the Messiah did. He changed the management in Israel. He took those leaders that were in authority and moved them out. That's why Messiah said, I'm taking the keys from you. I'm taking the authority from you. I'm giving it to somebody else. So now, we see here that the authority has been taken. All right? We agree on that? The authority has been taken from the previous leadership. All right? Which were the Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, chief priests. That leadership has now been, how do I say it? They have now been fired. Okay? That's the only way I can say it. The authority has been removed from them. But now, who now has received the authority? He said, I'm taking it from you, I'm going to give it to another that's going to bring the produce, who's going to produce the fruits. So now we go to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16, verse 19. Check this out. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 19, what we find here is that the Messiah transfers the kingdom authority to the apostles. We find this in that 19th verse of chapter 16 of Matthew chapter 16, 19th verse. Write that down. Those who may be watching us, please write this down. Matthew chapter 16, verse 19. This verse is the verse that shows us how the kingdom authority that have been taken from the religious leaders, from the Pharisees, okay, has now been given to the Elohim, the apostles. Here we go. Let's read. And so it says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, that whatsoever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So, in this, Messiah, he was speaking specifically to Peter. He was speaking specifically to Peter in this. But if you really want to get the context of this, the real context of it, you got to start at verse 12 and start reading through it. Because in verse 12, it says, then they understood that he had not told them to beware of the yeast of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Because he had just said to them, you know, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Because he was telling them, you need to beware of their teachings. All right? And then he continues on, and he starts saying to them, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they say, some say you are Jeremiah. Some say that you are Eliyahu, which is Elijah. Some say you one of the prophets. Some say you even John the Baptist that may have come back from the dead. And then he says, but who do you say that I am? And all of a sudden, Peter speaks out, you know, because he's speaking to all of the apostles at that time. They're all there. And he says, you are the Mashiach ben Elohim, which is son of Elohim. And so Messiah says, flesh and blood didn't reveal that to you, but my Father which is in heaven, he revealed that to you. And he says that your name is going to be called Kepha. In the scriptures it says Peter. In Hebrew it's Kepha. Kepha is the term that means stone. All right? He said your name is going to be Kepha. And on this stone I'm going to develop, I'm going to build my assembly. And he says that the gates of Hades, or the gates of Sheol, or death, that's a more appropriate term to say, shall not prevail. And then he says in verse 19, now, I done told y'all all this, and y'all know who I am. He said, now listen. He said, and I give to you the keys of the kingdom. He said, and this is where he's transferring that authority. Here's where Messiah says, I'm giving you now the authority of the kingdom. That whatever you bind, the phrase to bind and to loose, those are phrases that mean that you have the authority to prohibit things in the earth realm, and you have authority to permit things in the earth realm. What you bind or what you prohibit, if you do that down here in the earth realm, in heaven, it's recognized. In other words, there is a it's deputation. You understand what I mean? It's deputation. It's like, okay, I'm putting in your hands the authority. Whatever you do, and you're doing it right, we're going to recognize it in the heavens. If you permit a thing, in heaven it's permitted. If you prohibit a thing, in heaven it's prohibited. That's serious power.
Yeah, okay.
That's serious power. See? And this is what the Messiah gave to the apostles. And that same power that was given to the apostles has been channeled downstream to all of those in the body. That's why when you have new ministers that are being raised up, that disciples are being raised up and they're called into the ministry, when they have hands laid up on them and they are consecrated into the ministry, that laying on of hands is the same transmission of that authority that the Messiah gave to the apostles. That same authority is what's been transmitted throughout all of the centuries through the servants of Elohim. When they have hands laid upon them, it's a transmission of authority. So that whatsoever you bind here is recognized there. Whatsoever you loose here is loose there. And that authority, it ain't just limited to just the ministry, but it is also transitions to those who grow in the things of Elohim in the congregation, so that they also have the same authority as they move and walk in faith and trust the Most High. See, we don't even really understand the power that we have. That's why it's important for us to have teaching such as this. That's why it's important that people be discipled, so that they could understand how the kingdom of Elohim works, how it operates, how it functions. This is important. This is helpful. See, this is very important. Because we don't, average believer doesn't really know the power that they have. But the only way that you're able to function in this power, you got to first know that you have it. And you got to also know where it comes from and know how it's channeled. And you also have to know the responsibility that you have as a believer to sit under leadership so you can receive all that the Almighty has for you. That's very important. But, a lot of times people don't get that, because they hear something here, they hear a little bit there, they hear a little bit there, and they don't get the full counsel of Elohim regarding these very important subjects and concepts. All right, so let me move on. So we see that the kingdom authority has been transferred from the Pharisees. It's been given to the apostles. So right now today, even though you have a system called Rabbinic Judaism that is existing, that has a Talmud, that wishes to claim authority, all right? Because the Pharisees of the first century, all right, are the predecessors. They are the originators of present-day Rabbinic Judaism, all right? Just so that we understand where the groups came from. Got it? So, if you were to go to any one of the Orthodox Jewish shuls or Chabad house, or wherever there is a Jewish temple, all right, they are of the sect of the Pharisees. That's the origin of it. Okay? Not throwing stones. I'm just making a point that is true. That's all. It's true. They are the Pharisees. Right? And Yahshua took that authority. So for those that don't believe in Yahshua, of course, they think they still have the authority. Okay? But Yahshua, according to what we read in our scriptures, Yahshua took that authority and gave it to the apostles. So if you're going to have any kingdom authority, you ain't going to get it there. Okay? That needs to be known. You need to know that. Okay? You're going to get it through the spiritual leadership that's in the Messianic Israelite community. All right? That's where you're going to get it. So, stewardship authority has been delegated to all believers. Okay? If we look at Revelation chapter 5, verse 10, I'm going to try to hurry up and finish this last part real quickly. I'm going a little bit beyond my time. I only like to provide an hour of teaching, but it looks like I'm going to be an hour and 10 minutes. Well, maybe an hour and 5 minutes. I'm going to do my best here, hurry this up. Revelation 5, verse 10. And it says, "You have made them to be a kingdom and priests, serving our Elohim, and they shall reign on the earth." So again, we see that the stewardship authority among all believers have a piece in this thing. All right? It's not limited to just those in the ministry leadership. All believers have a piece of this thing. All believers take part in this stewardship in the kingdom. Because it says that he has made them to be a kingdom and priests serving our Elohim. We are servants. All right? Servants of the Most High that are made a kingdom are the ones that share in that authority. Okay? So, every one of us are significant in doing the bidding of the Almighty here in the earth. Okay. The kingdom of Elohim manifested visibly upon the earth. So, we've seen the parable of the mustard seed, that its final development is that it becomes a tree, a shrub. That's the manifestation of it. Started off as a seed hidden in the ground, full manifestation as a tree. So that basically tells us that the final development of the kingdom of Elohim will be on the earth. It will be visible. That's the thing. That it will be visible. Not hidden, visible. Also, the Messiah is to rule the nations with a rod of iron. In Psalm 2, it talks about Messiah ruling the nations with a rod of iron. In Revelation chapter 2, verse 27, it talks about Messiah literally ruling the nations with a rod of iron. Also in Revelation chapter 12, verse 5, and in Revelation chapter 19, verse 15, it talks about Messiah ruling the nations with the rod of iron. Right now, he's not ruling the nations with a rod of iron. It's the time of the Gentiles that are ruling and having dominion on the earth right now. All right? When Messiah returns and sets up the visible kingdom, he's going to rule the nations with the rod of iron. Also, we want to know that Messiah, who is Yahuwah manifested in the flesh, will be king upon the earth in Jerusalem. All right? He'll be king on the earth in Jerusalem. If we look at Psalm chapter 2, verse 6, Psalm chapter 2, verse 6 talks about the fact that he's going to be king. Zechariah chapter 14, verse 9, write that down. Zechariah chapter 14, verse 9 specifically says, and I mentioned this in the last teaching, it says that he will be king on the earth. Zechariah, it refers to how the Yahuwah will come down, and it says that his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, and the Mount of Olives is going to split. And when you go down to the ninth verse talks about that he will be king on the earth. Right? Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 5 through 6 talks about him being king. Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 24 and 25 talks about him being king on the earth. So all these verses are with reference to a visible, manifested king and kingdom on the earth. Not invisible anymore. So the final phase of the kingdom's development is going to be visible. Also, last point, the nations on the earth shall come to Jerusalem to worship the king. And I'm going to wrap it up with that. Zechariah chapter 14, verse 17 through 18. And I'm going to wrap it up with that verse. Here's what we know. Right? It's like me putting the icing on the cake, so to speak. Because you got some perspectives on the kingdom of Elohim that, like, for example, there's a Catholic view where they believe that the kingdom of Elohim is in place, and they look at it as it is visibly in place on the earth now through the vicar of Christ, which is the Pope. That's the Catholic position. Anytime the Bible talks about that the kingdom of Elohim is going to be visible on the earth, the Catholics have interpreted it as Messiah is ruling and reigning over the earth through his vicar. The term vicar means substitute. All right? Now, those who are Catholic, who know anything about Catholicism, look up the word vicar of Christ. All right? That's a term that they came up with. They say that the Pope, this is the Roman Church, the Roman Catholic Church. They say that the Pope is the vicar of Christ, and that through the Pope, the Messiah is ruling the earth. Okay? Now, with that concept that the Catholic Church has, all right, when they developed that concept, and I hope your minds are kind of thinking, when they developed that concept about the kingdom of Elohim, they took that concept and ran with it. And rooted in that concept is the basis of how they were able to have power and authority over kingdoms during the Middle Ages, where they were the ones that were deciding who was going to be kings and who weren't, because they had tricked the Western world. All right? I use the term trick because that concept is not based upon truth. All right? Because the scriptures that we've read, it talks about the visible Messiah coming, where everyone will submit to his rule and reign. What the Catholics did was that they came up with this concept of merging the spiritual kingdom that's existing and trying to say that the visible rule of the Messiah is already taking place through the Pope. And all the Western kingdoms believe that concept and that perspective. That's why they all submitted to the Pope. See, this is the reason why it's important that you have proper teaching. Because when you don't have proper teaching, you can have things happening in the world that can affect nations and countries for generations over false teaching. Okay? It's the reason why it's important that we know the truth of Scripture, so that we know how it's going to go down. All right? But there again, the Roman Catholic Church is a system that has an agenda to have domination over the world. All right? Now, I'm not going to say what the Roman Catholic Church is right now, but in another teaching I probably will say what I believe it is. But anyway, let me read this and wrap this up. Zechariah chapter 14, verses 17 and 18. Here's what it says. It says, if any of the families of the earth do not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, Yahuwah of hosts, there will be no rain upon them. And if the family of Egypt do not go up and present themselves, on them shall come the plague that Yahuwah inflicts on the nations that do not go up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. So what this is saying is that, just giving you more information, that the final manifestation of the kingdom will be on the earth, and Messiah will be king on the earth, all right? And there will be nations coming up to Jerusalem to worship the king on the earth. It's going to be a visible kingdom. That's the final phase of it all. So I'm going to close with that. Is there any questions about this this lesson? Any questions about this lesson? I'm only taking questions about this lesson. Any questions? No? All good? Well, the Almighty be praised. Let's pray. Abba Yah, thank you so much for your mercies, your grace, your kindness. Thank you for the opportunity of being able to present this lesson. And I trust, Abba Yah, that all the Talmudim have been edified and enlightened in the scriptures, and that their perspective has been sharpened. And I pray, Most High, that your name would be praised and glorified, so that as your disciples are developing and as they are growing, that they may be able to teach others as they learn truth, that they may also teach truth. We bless you in the mighty name of Yahshua. Well, the Most High be praised, and I want to say thank you for all of you who have chosen to watch us and to sit in on this teaching. You can go to our website at www.ncmmi.20m.com, and you can view the information that we have. There is a link that we have on our website called the Written Word Library, where we'd love for you to go and to check out the resources that we have, either through some of the ancient books that we have that we believe will be very essential for your edification and your development in the Messiah. Thanks again for tuning in to Voice of Messiah Ministries, and also we invite you to share in our Moedim service on tomorrow by live stream, where we will be celebrating the Feast of Shavuot and talking about the significance of the Feast of Weeks as it relates to the purpose of Elohim and the Messiah. The Most High bless you. Shalom.